Living Well is one example of bringing this knowledge into action for men themselves, their communities, their families, and professionals alike. It's trauma-informed, and it's also survivor-informed. And that's where I'd like to pass on to Gary.
All right.
Thank you.
Patrick. Okay. So I'm going to... just felt I could have kept going with this little slide here, and I just put more commas and then put all the other things in there. So it's very trauma-informed, gender, justice, culturally appropriate and hopeful community responses that support men in all their diversity. That's the kind of challenge I think we're kind of faced with. And I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of this stuff that, Patrick's framed up as important, but also introduce you to some kind of new resources and information that we have, and also kind of challenge ourselves and be real about where we're at in all this. We've heard recently a lot about trauma-informed care and practice. It's been like the last 3-4 years, there's much more importance around that. And I'd say this is an excellent skeleton for which us to hang our responses in talking with people. But I think one of the things about it is there's some add-ons that we need to have when we're working with people who've experienced, or with men who've experienced childhood sexual abuse or sexual assault, as we do when we're working with women. It's a valuable starting framework. It's like the skeleton without the meat on the bones, and I think that's part of the challenge. When you do trauma-informed practice, somebody might experience a trauma in their child, which might be quite debilitating, but it might not involve a criminal offence. And I think we must not get away from the fact is many of the struggles that the people I work with, our service works with, and people kind of live with, is around a sense of injustice. A crime has been committed, and we mustn't underestimate the value of having that acknowledged in some way. For some people, there's an opportunity for that, in a sense, through the criminal justice system. Some people, there's an opportunity through the civil system. For some people, the offender's dead. They can't find that person anymore. And so there's a sense of injustice, and we're challenged to find new ways to articulate justice, to help people speaking out for that. And there's people here who found various ways. I think it'd be okay about sharing this story. For one of the guides, we know he's dead, but he has a page on Wikipedia. And it didn't used to have that this man was a sexual offender on Wikipedia. And the person I'm thinking about spent a bit of energy in articulating to the people who manage Wikipedia that this man had actually been reported in the latter part of his life for committing sexual offences against children. And they had a bit of to and froing. It's finally now this man's in his place. And on this page on Wikipedia, it says clearly that there was reported around sexual offences. So that was a sense of justice around this, even though the man's dead, but it was a sense of injustice, and it was a creative way to find that, to put him in his place. So that's really important to find that. We also need to recognise gender. Now, not in this simplistic gender binary way that this is a gendered crime of men committed against women. Absolutely it is. In a sense, predominantly of sexual offences we understand are committed against females by males. However, we know at its very heart the experience of sexual abuse or sexual assault is a gendered crime, as in where you experience it on your body is gendered. Where it's risky for you is gendered. The type of sense you make of it is gendered. Where you might want to access support is gendered. The type of things that you would like or you're seeking in the world is gendered. And that's true for women and men, but it's not a simple thing. It's the fact is this is through all parts of people's lives. And it's a bodily experience. It's an invasive bodily experience, so we need to remember that. So it's a bodily gendered experience around that. And so that's part of the response. Now, what I'm not going to divide and say, I'll say there's all these responses for women and there's responses for men. What I'd say is 80 to 90% of the things that work for women who've experienced sexual violence are the same that works for guys. However, you need to attend to that 10 to 20%. And that's a really important part of the work. We need to recognise, and Patrick's alluded to this, when you're talking to guys, men, this is not men who've been sexually abused, by the way, this is just men in general. We are crap at our own mental health and well-being. We don't look after ourselves. We often don't go to the doctor for a whole host of reasons, unless we're injured or something, or we've got this strange rash that suddenly appeared. And even then we try to self-medicate for a prolonged period of time before we actually go to the doctor. So in a sense, when you're working with a man who's experienced sexual abuse or sexual assault in a mainstream or a specialist service, you need to not presume that he has good mental health literacy. that he is good at looking after himself, physical exercise and nutrition, you're going to probably more likely to be smoking, more likely to be doing drugs and alcohol, and men who've experienced sexual violence are 5 times more likely to be doing that as well. We know that men's, chance of unemployment, this can be quite even more devastating for them. They're more likely, in a sense, to experience violence. They're going to die 6 years younger. So it's right, you're not working with people already up. There's some good general health and well-being is really part of this. We need to, and I've used this slide before, and that one on the right is actually from the Queensland Health Sexual Offences Medical Kit of up to 2003. And I put this up as a graphic example because really, up until, well, even now, we kind of think almost, when we think about sexual violence, we think about female victimhood. And people might not be able to read the bit up the top right of that. And it used to say, and imagine if you're a child in the 1980s, 1990s, and the early 2000s, and you're reporting this, and can I just say the adult one is exactly the same, except the figure's got breasts. And it says, for male patients, alter sketch appropriately. That is the message that, in a sense, if it's women that experience sexual violence, it's not men. One of the things that many perpetrators will say to boys and men who they sexually assault is that you're not a real man, you're a woman. So when we have a set of services that always articulate that the victims of sexual assault, and don't leave room for the men, but the victims of sexual assault are female only, it's taking the same discourse, the same narrative that, in a sense, the person who perpetrated might have used against this guy. So we need to have an awareness of that and make sure we leave room for the complexity of this issue and about how we respond. We know now that we have strategies around certain things. We have a national male health policy. Doesn't really mention sexual assault of males at all. Not at all. This is like a 2013-14, that one. We've got a national suicide prevention strategy. Doesn't really prevent. You've seen those figures about how high it is, but the issue of sexual abuse of males doesn't appear of that. It's a specialist group we want to support. We have a national action plan, and it's to reduce violence against women and children. Now, what's interesting about that action plan is it said clearly that this doesn't refer to males who have been sexually assaulted. They're a different and a smaller group. I've got the actual words there, but I won't bother reading them out. That will require a different strategy. Well, that was 2009-10, and we still don't have that strategy articulated. So in a sense, at a public policy level, we are failing men who've experienced sexual violence. There's also the fact is that there's a kind of glimmer of a hope at a national level or statewide. New South Wales Sexual Assault Prevention Strategy will be launched in November 2017. In Queensland, we don't have a sexual assault prevention strategy. At national level, we don't. It's usually actually incorporated under the domestic violence strategy, which then, of course, we want to have a domestic violence strategy. We want to end violence against women and children, absolutely. But these children grow up and they're adult males. And so where is the kind of strategies and the policies to make sure that those men are supported? Okay, so I can just rack through basic needs, and you'll see right at the top there, I put an emphasis on engagement. And I think that's the kind of gap that many services kind of fall into, saying, we're available for men who've experienced sexual violence if they wish to come forward. Well, they're not going to come forward. You could have the most beautiful rooms. You could have these doors saying, oh, welcome and everything like that. The fact is that men have spent years hiding away, trying to get help before. As one guy in the sexual assault service in Canberra said, we've been bumping into services for years. Yeah? They're drug and alcohol and everything, but nobody's really picked up and helped us through this door. The fact is that we need to find new and creative ways to reach out and engage men and to support them, to sense that things can get better. We actually do know about things that we can improve, and we can design services to better support men. There is a reality that some services, some sexual assault services, won't have men come through the front door or won't book rooms for them. They'll refer them on. This is again another message to those men, really, that this is we're not here for you. So we need to make sure that all services provides appropriate support for them. We need to make sure that you give practical information. Now, the booklet thing I wrote a few years ago, it's lovely. It kind of what was key about that part of writing this with my friend Cameron Boyd was the fact that we wanted to not just name some of the challenges, but give people practical information that they could take away and about how you could help address some of these concerns, that's anxiety, etc. And always have tips in there about that. It's this size, so a guy can put it in his pocket. And what's lovely is that there's now a North American version. they've kind of read. There's a UK version, and believe it or not, next month there's going to be a Lithuanian version for the refugees in Lithuania. So I'm quite happy to give all of that stuff away, this information. It's not an intellectual property because it's about improving services for people. So, but practical information, because a guide doesn't want you to just talk and go over the problem again and again. He wants to make sure there's appropriate support, and he's given skills and useful things to work. Some things will work for some time. Some things will work for one guy or not for another. So it's about being creative and sharing all of that information and the learning we get from guys about what's working and not working. We need counselling, but alongside counselling is advocacy and support. Counselling is part of the equation, and we need to offer guides either male or female counsellor. That's part of the service. We had a national telephone helpline that didn't have any male counsellors about sexual assault. And so we need to, be aware that we need to provide the options for people so that they can, at the practical level, that they can have that. Majority of guys will prefer to talk with a woman around that stuff. It's not surprising given that sexual abuse has happened by a guy. Group programs are really important for us, and this is about breaking down the isolation, breaking down the sense of self-blame, and actually feeling normal and breathing in a group of guys. It doesn't mean we have to always talk about abuse and bad stuff. We had a group a couple of weeks ago where 15 guys rocked up. 15 guys in North Brisbane. It's our monthly support group and sense all like that. That same week we had a group for parents of guys who experienced abuse, who'd never talked to another parent who'd experienced abuse. And we also have a bi-monthly group for partners as well. So groups help break down that sense of isolation, help build community support and supporting change. Patrick's mentioned justice and life course, but we need a community capacity building approach. So, in order to make some of that kind of more available, this is where I try and go all techie on us, and we'll see whether we can do it. So I'm pleased to launch today, after many years of struggles, and the support of Patrick and actually a large number of people in this room, we're now able to launch a kind of online portal. You'll see that we've got Griffith University helped us, 1 in 6 of my colleagues in the US, and Survivors of Manchester also friends who are kind of helping, because it's kind of like his niche area, shall we say. We have a number of portals already, online training that we've already got. We've got information about effects, about disclosures. This is for professionals. No professional in Queensland should now say, I didn't know, because the information is now there, it's available, it's accessible. So, and we're also about starting to provide people with some practical information about, say, I'll stick on this is where we hope it actually works. So it's orientation to trauma-informed care with guys. There's some practical information about how to do that, about some of the frameworks for practice, about how we can help and how we can further develop support for guys and about their coping, etc. So I'm just clicking away here. And so it's about developing knowledge, but I would see this as a baseline knowledge. In the sense, my experience and my kind of position on this, if somebody's been through absolute hell and horror, the least you can do as a professional is to be at the top of your game. You should not be engaging in doing some work if you haven't taken the time, or when men speak to you about this, about acting, to make sure that you are properly informed about how best to support guys. There's also another part to this, which I'm really pleased to announce after all these years. It's the launch of the Foundation's Men's Group Manual, or Programme Manual, for working with men who've experienced childhood sexual abuse. This manual was developed in a sense from our experience of over, for us it's 12 years of running groups in Queensland, and also my friend in Ottawa, Canada, Rick Goodwin, who worked with what was the Men's Project, but now Men and Healing, and that's 20 years of experience of running programs with men. And we came together and created this online group program, this group program. Now, when I say comprehensive, if you want to print this, is 250 pages. All right. We have provided you with a session plan for every single session around this. We've provided you with information about group facilitation skills, tips and challenges, pre-group interviews, intake and assessment, group structure and organisation. All right. We have provided you in this process with appendices, which is about assessment and review documents, about participants' resources, which you can print out if you want as a single resource, or you can print out it's a little bit. So I'll go to the bottom of this, is all of this stuff. And just to give you a sense of that, appendices, participants workbook. So here are some of the pages that are available for you in the sense of working with these guys around that. So if we just click on one, you can have it printed out as a whole single book, or if you wanted to, You could go, okay, we want to print out grounding tools for some guy, we want to give him some information to take away. So what you'll find is a lot of this stuff and this resources is for women as well, but in a sense worldwide there is nothing in a sense available on the web, but also in a sense as a group program that's take for you to have and to use and to kind of further develop it around working with men. So that's part of the work, and that's the Foundations Manual. But it's also to recognise that there's significant diversity, that not all men are the same. And so we need to, and I failed to acknowledge Wild, who has helped in the development of the web resource. And there's a whole program about working with men with intellectual and learning difficulties. And what's good about that as well, we want to link you back to the Wild online portal about further training around that stuff as well. It's recognised in different groups. But look, here's a little list about, in a sense, of the diversity amongst men. We don't need to treat all men the same. What we know is men with a disability, particularly with the intellectual disability, the figures of sexual victimisation are around 60 to 70%. So it's almost easier to believe, well, this might be somebody who's experienced sexual violence. We know amongst the deaf community that 50% of males report childhood sexual abuse. But we also know that 50% of females report childhood sexual abuse in the deaf community around that stuff. So what we've done is we've developed 34, that booklet I translated into Auslan, or the Deaf Society of Queensland helped translate for us, and we now have 34 videos. So that's available for people in sign language about how to act that. I'm going to come to the First Nation community about developing specific responses for supporting First Nation communities. We know that, in a sense, from the Royal Commission, that over 700 men in prison have come forward to report childhood sexual abuse. Queensland has the unenviable award, shall we say, of having more men come forward than any other state in this country. And what's great is that Royal Commission's allowed us to provide, amongst other services, with Relationships Australia, Bravehearts and others, to come forward around this. But the difficulty is what will happen when the Royal Commission finishes. There's particular challenges there. You'll see the stuff around working with transgender people, transgender men and women. We know, I was chatting with somebody there, there's 18 transgender people in prison, 14 of them have reported childhood sexual abuse. The figures for transgender people is higher than for straight women. It's much higher. It's around at least 50%. So we need to recognise that particular communities need particular help with men in the military. We know that childhood sexual abuse happens in different services in the military, but you also know they double down on keeping quiet. They are very good at managing incredible emotional pain and physical pain. And in a sense, as a group of men you kind of meet, you would not know that stuff had happened after them. They are so good at covering. They're also so good at, in a sense of, also their ways of functioning aren't good at times. But that as a group is another group who we have to be aware of. Conflict zone, sex workers, high rates again, and same-sex attracted community. I would say that 50% of those there, we probably failed in relation to developing really good nuanced responses that reach out and engage that particular community. I have no sense that we're anywhere near where we need to be in relation to develop specific response and acknowledging for specific community members. So we got all the stuff that we've got, the online stuff and the web stuff, which we kind of want to distribute and give away because what works it's useful for somebody, it's a benefit for all of our community. And that's why I'm grateful for the support of those government agencies and, anxiety about the funding ending in June 2018, and in a sense because in a sense our work isn't there, and it's about the reason why web stuff is so good is because you can access it at 3 a.m. in the morning when things are just falling apart. You've got some information, you've got to check in, you've got some useful stuff around that stuff. We can't expect people to come forward and talk to us face to face. We have this kind of gold standard view of therapy about working with people. The reality is the majority of guys will never go anywhere near it. If you think about it, it's madness to think that many guys can even get to that place. Because if you think that my experience is when I felt the most vulnerable in my life was the experience of sexual abuse. In order for me to then access the service face to face, is I've got to acknowledge this sense of vulnerability, which doesn't fit with me as a guy, because one thing you're not meant to be is vulnerable. And you guys would say, at 10 or 12 I was fast or tried to get away. I've got to say, I've then got to articulate that vulnerability to somebody else. And when I walk in that place, that other people will know I'm vulnerable around this and around this issue. And then I go to these therapies which say, well, you've got to talk about this most horrendous thing when I'm going to feel really vulnerable talking about it. So we need to find new ways to work with people around that doesn't require all this. And that's why some online stuff is good. And we know that telephone work can work really well. I'm going to talk about that, and Anthony's here, and we've got time for this to chat about the videos. We've got a short video, 6-minute video to shoot that we developed in partnership with Didgeridoo and Natural Performing Arts. And I'll have Anthony talk about that afterwards. Because one of the things we know is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are 2 to 4 times more likely to experience childhood sexual abuse. We cannot see this out of context of invasion and colonisation, about removal of country, denial of language and culture. And the fact is that high representation of Aboriginal children in juvenile justice, in out-of-home care, that's what the Royal Commission has identified as high-risk places. We placed children away from the protection of their community and family, and in the process we made them more vulnerable to sexual abuse by our own government policies. But what we also need to know is that the responses may not be the same responses that we use for working with people from the kind of general community. We need to find culturally appropriate responses where people feel connected with their culture. So here's a short video. And it's 6 minutes, and then Anthony might come up and talk to us in a minute about that.
Men who have experienced child sexual abuse, that's one of those issues or topics that not many people talk about. So to provide opportunity for us to have a discussion about that is really important.
For me personally, it's been a challenging time. Well, it's really hard. You're mixed emotions. You're glad that someone is going to listen. You're glad you can tell your story, but you're embarrassed by it all. So there's some obstacles you've got to overcome personally to come forward and talk about it, which is a real struggle.
It's something that shouldn't be shied from. It's something that definitely shouldn't be shied from. It's something that it's taboo. It's a taboo subject, you know. People who have experienced it hold on to it, and which eats within them.
So now you're sounding like a didgeridoo player, straight away.
I was inappropriately touched as a young child on a few occasions. It's something you don't talk about. We tend to push it. You push it aside, you push it back, you don't want to think about it. When you come to a group like Didgeridoo and you feel comfortable with men, and then you learn that there's other men there that will listen to what you have to say, it's easier to open up.
These men are finally getting a voice, voicing their inner feelings, voicing their frustration, and are able to do so in a culturally safe environment.
Deadly. Yeah, keep going.
Being part of a group of men that have talked about sexual abuse in their youth has been a real eye-opener for me. For me personally, it's helped me talk to not particularly men in this group, but other men and other friends and family about how that's affected me and my family.
I think that it's healthy for people to be able to speak about it. It's good for them to be able to confide in one another or to learn something about it. Those things don't need to be a secret.
It needs to be shared, and that informal counselling also. Each of them is learning off each other. They all contribute and they all take something away in a positive atmosphere that they all share.
When the didgeridoo group came together, we would talk about our community. It was predominantly around didgeridoo and identity and culture and living as Aboriginal people today in a really big city. What was that like? You know, what are our experiences? So as we talked about these different issues, we became aware that there were a couple of men in our group who had experienced sexual abuse in their youth when they were boys. And so we wanted to take that issue up. And what we found was, because we raised the issue, I think, in a particular way, which was slowly and thoughtfully, men started thinking about their own lives and their own families and their community. And so they started thinking about, well, what would it be like for us then to have this knowledge and then to talk about this a bit further. It's been amazing, really. It really has. I feel really privileged, like really privileged.
Well, for me personally, it's been a fantastic journey to be involved with the didgeridoo group and highlight the issue of sexual abuse amongst young men. They've made it so much easier for everything to happen. And just coming here and you just forget about all your worries and your stresses and you learn the didge. And that's what it means to me.
To be part of a group of men who can actually bring up that question of child abuse, it becomes easier. And then when you do talk about it, then you can start to heal, actually.
If somebody were to disclose to you, there are a couple of things to remember about this, that it's not about you. Somebody's disclosed, so listen.
Believe him and try to resist the temptation to ask a lot of detail.
Let him know that you want to help. Accept that this is his story to tell his way.
Hear their story. Hear what it is that they want to say.
Listen to him, respect his trust in you.
Check in to ensure no one's at risk. Take time to listen to him and you don't have to have the answers or give advice.
Some of the things that we've talked about at Didgeridoo recently has been around letting them know that they don't have to be alone with this. That there may be places that they can go to get support. But if it is you that they want to talk to, that's okay. Just listen. Remember, confidentiality is important, and remember to just be the friend.
It's important to keep our children safe and for them to talk to us when they are experiencing difficulties.
Anthony, I'll just invite Anthony up for a couple of words. Anthony, because to be part of this, I guess you've spoken a little bit here as well. And it's been a privilege for me, can I just say, to work with Didgeridoo and hear that, because like you're always learning about how best to do it. And I suppose one of the things for me thinking about this stuff is that if we're going to really respond well, we need to listen to the elders and the people of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and to support them in developing their own community that fits with a cultural history of dealing with challenging issues. And I guess that's one of the things I was just going to check with you about the men's group and the didgeridoo group, what that's about. Now, I haven't seen this yet, Anthony. Is it okay if we unveil it?
This is about journeys. No one travels in a straight line. So we travel in crooked lines, in particular paths and tracks. And so we come across people and situations or issues all the time. They filter through to us. We come across people and situations that are good for us, people that are not good for us. We come across people who are just like us on a journey somewhere. And what we have to do is work out where it is that we need to stop and take stock, sit, rest, who is good for us, who is not good for us, and why, while we continue our journey. And so this painting is is really about our group. It's about Didgeridoo. So we came together to talk about lots of different things, but we came together for one purpose, and that was just to learn the Didgeridoo. We grew into something else, and all of our journeys as a result of Didgeridoo grew into something else. But it's any painting. It's about any story, about anybody growing, knowing that there are people around who can support, people around who are not good for us, events, places, and finding your way through that. That's what this painting is about.
Thank you. Because the story of hope is really important at that, and also recognising that all community members have a role. Because what the Royal Commission has done is highlight some of the damage and the horror. It's also highlighted resilience and people speaking up against overwhelming odds and supporting each other through the most difficult of times. And so I think one of the things is to find ways to support that and honour that. But also for other community members to become involved in supporting that and letting people know that they support change around this stuff. Now I've got another video and I thank Mal who assisted in putting that video together because the reality is when you see yourself on the screen you can't pretend it's not you and you're in the room, and I'll let Mal tell his story about the importance of the one blue string.
G'day, I'm Mal. Thanks for expressing your interest in getting on board with One Blue String. This campaign invites guitarists to replace one string with a blue string to help promote awareness for male survivors of sexual abuse. I am one of those 1 in 6 men that was sexually abused in childhood. Why does One Blue String resonate with me? It has given me the courage and strength to do something I've always wanted to do, play the guitar. It has helped me to express myself and stand up and be heard. Sexual abuse is a betrayal of trust. It is isolating and makes you doubt yourself. At a young age, I became a ward of the state when my father shot and killed my mother. I was 8 years old. In the boys' home, I gravitated to music, mainly the band, because I thought that's what I want to do. It helped to transport me and to dream of a better life. This dream turned into a nightmare when my music teacher started abusing me. What he did to me haunted me for decades. I was left feeling it was my fault. The sexual abuse disconnected me from myself and from my love of music. Now over 30 years later, I'm learning to reconnect and trust again. Picking up a guitar and playing music has helped me to heal. It has taught me discipline and self-compassion, and that it's okay to make mistakes. Today I am playing and putting myself out there again. Why? Because I can and it feels great. I still struggle with self-image, but with practice, maybe one day shine through. So thank you for listening to my story and choosing to get on board with One Blue String. Awareness, advocacy and support is what One Blue String is, and I love it.
Wait, there's a postscript to this one. I think one of the things, I've been through that process with Mal, in a sense, not with Mal, but having sat there in the court, is that there was over 85 recommendations by the Royal Commission about how we prosecute and improve the criminal justice system. We need to implement every single one of those. It is a horrendous place to put people forward. It's as re-traumatising often as the experience of abuse, even though abuse was are traumatising enough. So I can only hope that we support the changes around the criminal justice system. And this is somebody who was a police officer for 14 years, who watched this system and participated in this system. We have to get better about providing victims with an opportunity to tell their story in a way that they feel listened to, heard, and justice is served in some way. And that's not necessarily about the sentence, but it's the experience of centring the victim's experience at the centre of our criminal justice system. We've got to be aware in relation to our services that we don't just see our role as simply the absence of problematic symptoms, because I could not be triggered, but I could have a crap life. Our role is to support the people who have experienced abuse to live rich and full lives. And let Patrick sum up here, but thank you, and I invite you to do a little bit of writing just on the words of encouragement.
Sure. Thank you, Gary. So very much we've set the scene, because we do know a lot. And the Royal Commission, as it closes this year, is an opportunity for us all to make that legacy into action. We have had Royal Commissions, and one that we can all remember is Black Deaths in Custody Royal Commission, that did not result in the sort of change that we were hoping for. And we have an opportunity here to take this legacy forward. And this involves action. It's not an end point. It's a bit like that last slide. It's how we deal with this issue of child sexual abuse in a proactive way, in a way that stops it from occurring in the first place, but also works in partnership with those who are suffering the impact. And I really just want to finish by closing and really congratulating Living Well and the great resource. I know it's been a big project and many hours of work, and please go out there and promote it. And thanks very much, Gary. Your work is just amazing in taking this forward. So thank you very much.
And can I say, in finishing up here, and we've just got some room for questions, but we're also available for questions afterwards. I should also acknowledge the people that I work with. Now, there's two groups of people I work with. There's the people I work with who some people would identify as survivors and clients, and there's people I work with who other people would identify as co-workers and employees, in the sense of they have both contributed to my life, but also making Living Well the best it can. It's through the sharing of stories of the people we work with that we can improve services for everybody. So thank you very much to everybody for participating and come today. Enjoy the food and drink available. Please, if you have any questions, we're quite happy to answer any questions or any comments. We're welcoming of those in wrapping up.
Thanks,